Hello, Year 13, and welcome to our lesson on Section B, Question 4. Now, you'll remember before we broke for Christmas and before the situation changed so rapidly for us, we were beginning to think about writing a feature article about women's language in which you assess the ideas and issues raised in text in A and B that we'd analysed and that you were to argue your own views. Now, I know with the recent events and the news that exams are not going to take place, this is really important that you hear this. We still, as teachers, need to present the evidence to support the grades we give you. So things like your coursework, the essay that I'm going to ask you to write based on the lesson today, all of this will be our bank of evidence. Okay? So I don't want you to think like, woohoo, no exams, complete release. Everything we do actually over the next few lessons isn't necessarily going to be about new information, but creating opportunities for you to evidence skills in those three essay areas. So we will be looking at analysis, getting you to write some essays that will give us that bank of evidence to justify the grade that we want to give you. So what is a positive, we could argue, is we are not going to be moving forward and developing new content, but we are going to use these online lessons and your time at home to produce and to kind of bulk up the evidence bank of essays. Okay, so it's almost like we're going to do some retrospective essay writing to bulk up our bank. Okay, so we can make a stronger case for where you're at. So what we're going to do is probably two lessons of prep, and then I'm going to ask you to write an essay. Now, guys, I have to be really honest with you. You know, we've had some wonderful times. You're brilliant to work with. I love you in class. But if you don't submit these essays, my evidence, or the evidence that me and Miss Lockett will have by which we can prove the grade we're going to give you, will be based only on your coursework, which will make our evidence flimsy, which means we'll only be able to say, well, you know, they could have. The more evidence we have, look at this essay, this essay, this essay, the more we can evidence and prove the grades we want to give you. So please take this opportunity to create some evidence in our portfolio of where you're at and what you're capable of seriously. All right, my darlings? But that said, I will guide you through every part of the process and I will work with you to make sure that happens. And I'm sure Miss Lockett will also be contacting you about the coursework and what you need to do there. Okay, so we're looking this week at writing a feature article about women's language in which we assess the ideas and issues raised in text A and B, and we argue our own views. Now, we had the previous lessons where we'd thought about the journalism that needs to be demonstrated or displayed in this article. And together in class, you'll remember before we broke up, we generated ideas for headlines, stand first and bylines. All of these three elements are indicative of what we call the journalistic, the sizzle, the style of an article. We identified from the ideas and issues in the articles that we looked at in class. Now you'll have it in the note form. Mine wasn't saved on the screen. Some of the ideas and issues that we might want to address. Okay, so the ideas and issues is really where we're planning to make sure that we comment on at least three things from the two articles that we read and that we analyse. Okay, so ideas and issues to be addressed. We might want to talk about Kim Kardashian. We might want to talk about Naomi Wolf. We might want to talk about what vocal fry is. But it's 3 points that we plan to intentionally reference the articles that we've read. And sometimes, as we've seen, it can be also the issues, whether we agree with them or not. Do we agree that vocal fry is damaging the career prospects of young girls? So that's what we planned for our journalistic element, the sizzle element. And we also began to create lots of potential pegs. Now, our peg page where we were making notes, okay, you can see there's loads of information here that we're potentially going to be able to use and to build into our story. Far too much than you would actually use in an article. Now, the balance has to be that we don't so overload our article with just random pegs that it doesn't have its cohesion, that it doesn't have the sense of flow and control. So across all of these ideas, as we begin to plan and write today, I would say maybe select one or two. You don't want to use all of them, but you might choose, for example, whether you're going to go down a popular or high culture reference route, whether you're going to use an extended metaphor of camouflage, or whether you're going to use an extended metaphor of mythology. So you would make a singular choice in each of these areas rather than saying I have to use all of them. Okay, now this page we did have from class before we made these notes. Again, you can stop and have a look and refer back to this in a minute. Now, in writing a feature article about women's language, we've got a style and a substance plan. Now, if you look through this plan, it's a simple plan in that really, when we look at the style in a minute and the substance, it's quite bare bones, but it is very directional. It clearly tells us over here that we want a headline. Once we've written a headline, we can tick that off. That we want to include our stand first and our byline. Once we've done that, we can tick it off. That we want an opening paragraph to establish our peg. Now, this is where you'll begin to use and manipulate the PowerPoint that's attached, the PDF that's attached, or you'll just pause the video and go back because you'll be using like both of these slides as we go through. So where it says opening paragraph to establish a peg, you might think, okay, I'm going to use in that opening paragraph a metaphor of camouflage, the desire to change and adapt to blend in. I'm going to make a reference to Britney Spears and the Kardashians. I'm going to make a reference to ... So, okay, opening paragraph to establish peg. Now, it then says that you're going to have a paragraph on theory, concept, idea number 1 linked by a peg, theory, concept, idea 2 linked by a peg, theory, concept, idea 3 linked by a peg, theory, concept, idea 4 linked to a peg. And this is the point where I do have to pause. Now, I know the reality is this, in terms of an exam model, looks very different for us now because you're not going to do an exam. But in terms of creating an essay that we'll put in your portfolio of evidence to get your teacher assessment, what we really mean here is you're going to write a paragraph maybe on Lakoff, a paragraph on Tannen, paragraph on Spender, a paragraph on Cameron and Hyde, and the information, the content will be exactly the same as an evaluative essay. You're going to tell me who they are, what they were doing, when they were doing it, what was good about the theory, what was bad. So actually, the content of the majority of your article is the same content as an evaluative essay on theory. The difference is we're using that linked by peg, that journalistic language to introduce and to write about those theories in a more conversational way, like a journalist would. It then says we want a closing paragraph to create a cyclical link by repeating words or phrases from the headline and stand first, and we want an explicit mention of the opening peg. So if we begin with a metaphor, we end with the same metaphor. If we begin with a reference by Britney Spears, we end with a reference by Britney Spears, and that creates a cyclical structure. Now, if we were getting you ready for the exam, guys, we would use this plan, this style plan, over and over. The substance is the bit that you would adapt on the day to the topic they gave you and the ideas in the article itself. So you want a headline that introduces the topic of women's language. They begin to match up now. We want a stand first and a byline that introduces and expands the topic of women's language. We want an opening paragraph to establish a peg that directly addresses a view or idea expressed in the articles and whether you agree. You want to, in that opening paragraph, as well reference the writers or writer, one of the writers of the other articles by name. So, for example, you might say, just the other morning, I was reading Naomi Wolf's Guardian article, and she has the nerve to call herself a feminist? Really? I thought we'd have moved on since the 70s and the stereotypical ideas of Lakoff that women are weak. So you've done a view and an idea. You've talked about one of the writers by name. Then you would go into your deficit, difference, dominance, differences, and myth sections. And the link by peg, we'll talk about that in a minute. It's always going to be led now by what you choose to do at the headline and your opening peg. So if we were doing a metaphor of camouflage, you might link each theory and concept in through that metaphor. If we were looking at the metaphor of myths, you would use mythology, words or phrases, people from mythology, to introduce each of the theorists, okay? And in the end, you're going to do an explicit reference to issues in the articles and close with your own opinion. Now, at this point, if it was in different contexts, we would just say, right, now it's your time to write your article. But we're going to put an extra step in today, okay? We're going to look at an article that was written, okay, in the exam itself. In an exam itself, that's an illustration of an A grade. Okay, now as we look at this article, we are going to be thinking about what it illustrates, what it tells us about that combination of style and substance, and it's going to help us make some decisions for our own articles so that when we begin to write, we've got a plan, we've got content, we've got a model to follow. Now, the truth is, guys, everybody's seen this example. It's an AQA published example. So the idea that you would simply reproduce this wouldn't work, okay? But it does tell us and show us how we can begin to craft an article. Okay, so here we go. Women's language is like not weak, okay? So there's our headline. We've planned that we want a headline that introduces the topic of women's language. And we can see here she's done that, this candidate has done that. Now, we've played with the ideas of headlines in class, okay? So that in itself is going to be quite a straightforward activity. Now, again, at this stage, if we're creating evidence that's going to support whether we give you C's, B's or A's, you could argue thinking creatively like this one, okay, about creating a headline that's a mix of a pun and an interrogative. That's not going to be a waste of time. So women's language is not weak, okay? And then here we go into our stand first. Just because women raise their voice at the end of a sentence, so that's also referencing what they've read about women vocal fry, doesn't mean they're less powerful. And then we've got the reference by, there's your byline. So your first job is going to be to create a headline and a stand first and a byline. Now, we've seen these done in different ways. We've seen 2 Guardian articles. We've seen the Daily Mail. So we've got models to follow. Okay, so there you go. I've just said it. Okay. And I do like using the Guardian models. So particularly the one from Deborah Cameron when we looked at that one. And I love the phrasing, it is a truism that. Okay, so there are certain things that we've seen that you can use your notes, you can go through and you can create a headline and a stand first of your own. Okay, that's going to be part of your job in a minute. Now, look, this is our opening paragraph. So remember, we said we want a headline, a stand first, a byline, and then into an opening paragraph. Kardashian craze is sweeping the globe. So this person, they've gone with their popular culture reference, but it also shows an awareness of what they've just read because they make reference to the Kardashians as being people that use vocal fry. So Kardashian craze is sweeping the globe, with many, namely young women, idolizing Kim Kardashian and worshipping the ground she walks on. So much so that some are starting to use what linguists are calling valley talk, characterized by the way Valley girls speak in California, and said Valley talk has caused uproar amongst feminists. But why? So in terms of us, this is that opening paragraph we say we've made a peg. They've created a link between the language topic of vocal fry and Valley talk and the Kardashians. Now, we've said that we can be creative. Our opening pegs can be anecdotal. Okay, just this morning, I was watching the news, or I was watching this morning. I was reading a Guardian article. So it's a way in which we create the peg. Okay, now the issues we're writing about, okay, now this is why it's kind of set up this way, are all the issues that we've seen and analysed in these articles already. Okay, we've annotated these. We know what the issues are. So this article is addressing those issues at this stage. So you could be explicit. So rather than Kardashian craze is sweeping the globe, feminist writer Naomi Wolf boldly claimed that young girls are disempowering themselves when they use a new affectation called vocal fry. Now, what we've done there is we've shown that we've read the articles, we're addressing them, and then from a journalistic point of view, but as I read that article, rather than agreeing with her, I found myself more and more angry. How could a feminist who claims to promote who claims to promote women in the same breath be knocking them down? It's time that we stop judging women and anybody on the way they speak and instead start thinking about the content of their character. So then I've created that journalistic style. I've got then ticked off my headline, my stand first, and then my opening paragraph. Now, guys, I am going to say at this stage how you choose to continue is you could choose to pause there and to write your headline stand first and opening paragraph and then come back and see what happens next. Or you can listen all the way through and then do the writing. Okay, so this person, I keep thinking it's a woman, a girl, a candidate. I'm anticipating based on the handwriting, but here we go then. So she then says, feminist Naomi Wolf wrote an article for the Guardian opinion pages. So actually it's that same approach we've just seen, trying to bully young women into stopping using language fry features such as vocal fry, the throaty, gravelly sound you make at the back of your throat, because apparently they make women appear weaker and less hireable. Okay, so what you can see there is Naomi Wolf and the criticism of her. So again, this candidate's getting the A grade because she's showing she's read these articles, but she's responding to what she's read. She shows she's understanding it and responding. Now, if you didn't want to do the Naomi Wolf approach, you can reverse, you can do exactly the same, but for the female article. Yep. Heaven forbid, heaven forbid that I should be confessing this as a journalist. But I was reading the Daily Mail and I came across an article in the female section in which actress Lake Bell talks about vocal fry. Now, as an actress, Lake Bell, I enjoy her movies, but her opinions on language? Come on, Lake Bell, what are you on about? So then I've addressed her as a writer, and then I've begun to challenge it, okay? So one would have thought that as a feminist, so our A-grade candidate is A-grade because she's challenging the ideas of Naomi Wolf. One would have thought that as a feminist, Miss Wolf would be arguing against the idea of the patriarchal society judging women's employability on their voice. But no, she's clearly got bigger fish to vocal fry. Now, to be honest, I love that punch she plays there, bigger fish to vocal fry. Now, again, we couldn't directly lift that and use that in our articles. That would be too close a copy, but it just shows the play, the creativity when we're using puns and pegs, and metaphors. Now, this idea, though, one would have thought that as a feminist, now we could say one would have thought that as an actress in a male-dominated industry, Miss Lake would be championing the employment of all women instead of saying that she wouldn't work with women that spoke a particular way. She's clearly got ... So you can see how you can begin to use this A-grade model to help you create your own, to get your own article informed. So far, we actually see that really we've got our headline, our stand first, our opening peg, and then she's directly referencing what she's read. So she's actually playing a really safe exam game because she's clearly ticking off everything she knows the examiner is looking for. Now, I will still be marking your essays using the exam criteria. So again, if you're following this kind of structure, you know that structurally you are hitting all the key marks, okay? So it then says the idea of gender-lect, men and women speaking differently, has long been discussed and disputed amongst linguists. Miss Wolf seems to echo the thoughts of Robin Lakoff, a linguist and self-proclaimed feminist, who in the 1950s, now guys, see that 1950s underline? Because we know Lakoff was not the 1950s. When was she? 1970s. So again, there's mistakes that this A-grade candidate makes that we don't need to make. We can be more in control. We can check and actually look and redraft these. Okay, so the idea of gender-lect has been long discussed and disputed amongst linguists. So gender-lect, is that idea of language being determined by whether you're male or female. It's all the topic we've covered, guys. Has long been discussed and disputed amongst linguists. Miss Wolf seems to echo the thoughts of Robin Lakoff. So then it literally, now that's the bit where I say, introduce your theorist, but with a peg. So here our writer is keeping a journalistic focus. She's talking about Miss Wolf. She's linked it that way into the theory. She hasn't just suddenly gone, Robin Lakoff writing in the 1970s with a theorist too. She's not just suddenly gone into evaluative kind of academic language. She's still writing like a journalist, but she's telling us about Lakoff. Okay, and the rest of this paragraph is that who, what, where information about Lakoff. In the 1970s, proposed a list of reasons why women's language is weak and inferior to men's. On the list, which Lakoff made up with no research, included features like asking questions and lacking a sense of humour. Oddly enough, Lakoff's claims in the list are widely rejected in the world of linguists, mainly because the list is really bloody sexist. Sounds familiar? Now, we've got there AO2 content. She knows some aspects of Lakoff's theory. She's not perfect, but she's keeping that journalistic tone, particularly with the risky, bloody sexist at the end, yeah? So she's trying to write with the peg at the beginning and the end of the paragraph, and then the middle content is theorist. So for you, you choose a theorist. It can be Lakoff, because you would know information that you could probably do a better job. It could be Tannen, it could be Goodwin, and you would write about the theorist in terms of how they contribute to the idea then that women and men use language differently. Okay? So guys, actually what we see from this paragraph though is that when we're writing our own articles, we want a lead-in sentence, the idea of genderlect that still has that peg, that kind of journalistic tone. We're then going to write about our theorists that we've chosen, showing who they are, what they did. Try and keep that colloquial tone, that journalistic tone, and then we end with a direct or peg. So I was thinking, like, if you were doing the mythology extended metaphor, yeah. So the mythology, the myth, the fallacy, the false belief that men and women speak differently has been around, as long as the myths from ancient Greece. Whilst we see a mythology, a dispute between gods and goddesses over who is more powerful and who gets to rule, nothing really has changed. Yeah. So then you kind of created your peg. So just as Miss Wolf seems to echo the myth, the fallacy that women are weak, it reminds us of one of the earlier goddesses of linguistic study, Robin Lakoff. So you could, use that term goddess to introduce Robin Lakoff to keep him with that mythology. Now, I did like as well the metaphor we came up with, the extended metaphor we came up with when we were looking at these theorists originally, and we talked about pioneering. Okay, that Robin Lakoff was the earliest pioneer. She went into the undiscovered, unclaimed territory of exploring men and women in language. Now, pioneer is a metaphor, although we didn't have it on our peg page from last lesson. It's actually a nice metaphor. Pioneer is somebody that explores. Behind the pioneer comes people that pretty much clean up the mess they make. Pioneers go and they tear up territory, they make mess. They're all about moving forward. They don't look behind. So Robin Lakoff's ideas are messy. She's always moving forward with her ideas. She doesn't look really behind to see the impact of those ideas. And then after her come other theorists that follow in her footsteps to a certain extent, but look to make sense of some of the messy claims. So you could do a really nice pioneer metaphor here if you wanted. Okay, and then we could also talk about Naomi Wolf as a modern pioneer, as a modern feminist. She should be pioneering and breaking new ground for women, not holding women back. And you could kind of create that metaphor. That'd be quite clever too. So, next, Lakoff isn't the only linguist to come up with reasons why men and women talk differently. In the red corner, we have dominance theorists who believe that men have a more powerful role in society, thanks patriarchy, which explains why the gender differences occur, with many studies into mixed-sex interactions to try and come up with explanations for the differences. The most famous and quoted one being a study by Don Zimmerman and Candice West, interactions between male and female college students. MB Zimmerman and West's investigation has been scrutinized by Professor of Linguists David Beatty, who His findings showed no significant differences in the number of interruptions made by men and women, opposing Zimmerman and West's findings that the ratio of male to female interruptions was 43:2. No one cares that BT's sample was a hell of a lot larger and more representative, because that would mean their theory was wrong. Anyway, I digress. So in this section, at the heart of it, we've got a paragraph on the dominance theorists, haven't we? Zimmerman and West and BT. We've seen both of these in class. We've done lessons on them. So the actual content of your next part of your article is pick another group of theorists. Now, they've gone for dominance theories. You could go, you can order it slightly different. And we've got this nice cohesive link. Lakoff isn't the only linguist, so she's linked back and she's also moving forward. Now, guys, in the red corner, we have this interesting phrase appear. Now, because we're looking at this article in sections, it is introducing a new metaphor that this writer is using, but you might not, or you might get the metaphor. Do you know where we would talk about a red corner? What cultural reference that's to? If not, just pause for a minute. Trust me, it gets revealed in a minute, but it just reminds us again that at the beginning of each new section, we don't want just to go straight into an academic overview of a theory. We want our pegs. We want our linguistic, journalistic language. And she does quite like the journalistic language that's quite colloquial. We've got the hell of a lot larger. We've got the bloody hell earlier. So they are trying to use that kind of almost colloquial slang terms in their writing, but it's bringing all those elements together. But we fundamentally got, now this is section 2 on dominance theorists. Now, in the blue corner, we have difference theorists who believe there is a biological difference between men and women called biologism that explains the differences. The brains behind the theory, pun intended, is Deborah Tannen, who proposed 6 conversational style pairs, explaining the differences in conversational aims for men and women and the way they go about them. Once again, people called BS on Tannen's claims because her pairs were based on findings from one married couple, a very unrepresentative sample for all 7 billion inhabitants. So you can see even the examiners said here that this challenges DT, Deborah Tannen, and we know that this is always a higher order mark. We get more marks if we challenge theories. But actually, in terms of content, this is very superficial. We've got no reference to date. We've got a very vague overview of the theory. And I do love the colloquial again. Once again, people call BS, which we know is a slang term for bull beep, because this writer is using that kind of language, yes, consistently, BS, hell of a lot, bloody hell, to kind of create maybe this authorial tone that's a bit aggressive, a bit fed up. Okay, so they're taking a risk in their language choice. Now, again, we can see from this model what we can do. We're going to choose a third theorist. So they've gone Lakoff, Zimmerman and West, and now Tannen. So they've covered 3 theorists. We can do exactly the same. It doesn't have to be the same 3 theorists. Okay, we introduce and frame at the beginning and the end of each section a peg, a journalistic style, but in the middle of our paragraphs, we are really writing about our theorists. Okay, then sitting in the audience watching the linguistic boxing match. There you go. So if you didn't know what the reference to the red and the blue corner is, it's a boxing reference. So this writer is using that metaphor now, the metaphor of a boxing match, and sitting in the audience watching the boxing match are the diversity theorists, who believe that it's hard to pinpoint differences between genders when gender itself is a social construct that is constantly changed, very forward thinking. Now you can see that within the context of an exam, there's this candidate's been writing for a while. There are some lapses in technical accuracy, some mistakes being made, but they are fundamentally consistently challenging and presenting knowledge on these theorists, okay? Very forward-thinking Deborah Cameron, the Queen of British Linguistics, is the leader of the diversity theories and has refuted Tannen's biologism. So there's your challenge, saying that she has made assumptions about the brain when we know next to nothing about it. Janet Hyde is second in command and proposed the gender similarities hypothesis, which claims that in reality there are many more similarities than differences between the speech of men and women. And there are bigger feminist issues like workplace discrimination that need tackling first. Naomi Wolf, take notes. So you've got this lovely link back to Naomi Wolf, the author that's being criticised. But fundamentally, this article now has shifted and maintained its focus on just presenting the different gender theorists. Can you see? So all that knowledge that we've got of all the gender theorists at our disposal. So if you look back through your notes, you will find we have all the information to do this article. Okay, we have knowledge. We're going to just pick our 4 theorists. Okay, the knowledge that you've got will be used to construct your paragraphs. Okay, and now we're coming to their final bit. The argument that women's language is weaker than men's will probably go on for a long, long, long time. But until we realise that part of the problem is using men's language as a standard rather than language in its base, genderless form, it won't be fixed any quicker. Also, when we realise that gender discrimination in the workplace isn't the fault of women's speech, more the sexist view of the employers, the world will be a more equal and harmonious place. So stop worrying about the way young women are speaking, because realistically it's the lesser of a lot of evils when it comes to copying Kim Kardashian. So actually you can see, like I said, we've got that final kind of close, that cyclical link back to where this writer has started with the reference to Kim Kardashian. It's actually quite a creative reference to Kim Kardashian with the idea of a lesser of lot evils when it comes to copying her. Their conclusion is really saying what we've said, that we have to accept that gender to a degree can influence behaviour, but it's a much more complex issue. And reducing the behaviour of any individual to one factor such as whether they're male or female is reductive, it's dangerous. So that is an example of an A grade exam response. We now know that you are going to be writing your own feature article about women's language. And what I want you to do for the rest of today is to use this to plan your article. Okay, to use this structure to plan your article. I want you to have a headline and a standfast and a byline. I want you to decide on what your opening paragraph peg is going to be. I want you to choose your 4 theorists. Now, at this point, guys, you need to be going back into your notes to get the information on those 4 theorists ready. And I want you to think how you're going to refer back to your opening peg in your closing. Okay? Now, that's what I want you to spend your time doing today, going through your notes to find the notes on the 4 theorists you're going to write about. You can re-look at the article. When we come together next lesson, then we're going to do a bit of shared writing. I'm going to say this and you're going to do it. And then you'll have the rest of that hour to do your article. Okay, now guys, I really do mean it in like a gentle kind of like motherly, somebody that really cares about you way. This essay plus some of the essays I'm going to get you to do over the next few weeks will all be part of our evidence that we can say this student is definitely worthy of a B or an A because. Now we know we've got evidence for you. Miss Lockett's going to have your coursework. You've done other essays, but the more evidence we have, the more likely the exam boards are to accept our grades. Okay, so if you don't hand in an essay, I've got no evidence. If you hand in an essay and it's not very good, it suggests I can only put forward a particular grade. Okay, my darlings, so spend the rest of this lesson prepping, looking through your notes, getting your ideas done. Okay, then when we're together next week, we'll just talk you through it bit by bit again, and then we'll have the rest of the lesson to finish it. Look forward to seeing you next week, guys.